Out yonder there was this huge world which exists independently of us human beings and which stands before us like a great eternal riddle, at least partially accessible to our inspection and thinking. The contemplation of this world beckoned like a liberation. It is because there is this huge world out there, this vast universe out there, that we want to make telescopes. We want to see the universe with our own eyes through the telescopes, not just to see pictures of it. And so we're going to make telescopes, but we're not going to make those ship's captain's spyglasses with a lens out in front. We're going to make much bigger telescopes with the mirrors in the back end, reflector telescopes, so that we can see the universe actually quite well through these bigger telescopes. The telescope that we're going to make is like this. It's open at the front. The light comes down through the front opening, down through the barrel or between the struts like this, to a mirror at the back end. I'll show you the mirror. I'll open the back end. It's a very slightly concave mirror, very slightly curved mirror, so that it will form a picture at the front end. The light from the mirror comes forward through our barrel or through the struts to a diagonal mirror, a secondary mirror up here at the front, where it's reflected up through the eyepiece tube forms an image just below the eyepiece, and we examine the image with the eyepiece. What you can see through a telescope depends primarily upon the size of the telescope. Through smaller telescopes like 4-inch in diameter or 6-inch in diameter, they're very good for terrestrial use and they're very good for the moon and so forth. But for planets and things, you need a bigger telescope like a 10-incher or a 12-incher, which are still very good in the cities. But if you want to see galaxies and things, what we call deep sky objects, if you want to see the whole universe from a mountaintop, you need a much bigger telescope like a 16 or an 18-incher. Right now we want to make a 16-incher. It's like having an eyeball about 8 feet in diameter with the pupil of the eye open to 16 inches. But you don't need to make yourself such a big telescope. You can make a smaller one, and you'll see as we go along people will be making 10-inchers and so forth. I think most people are familiar with the fact that a lens like this will focus light. You can get an image there, you see. Now what we call the focal length is the distance between the image and the glass. Now a mirror, a concave mirror, will similarly focus light because the light hitting the curved surface will converge forward like this. And again, in the case of a concave mirror, the focal length is the distance between the image and the glass. The major process in making these telescopes is to prepare the surface of the glass for our mirror. It's the same process for any size telescope, only more work for the larger ones. So what we're going to do is to grind a curve into the surface of this by grinding it against another glass like this with carborundum and water in between. And that's how we generate the focal length of our mirror. Then after we get it to the right depth so that the focal length is where we want it, then we're going to clean the curve up with finer and finer carborundums, finer and finer grits of carborundum until it's a very smooth curve. And then what we need to do is to polish it, not on a buffing wheel, but on a polishing lap like this, what we call a pitch lap. We're going to pour warm pitch on the glass, cut it up into squares like this, squeeze the curve of our glass onto the curve of the pitch. So the curve of the pitch is the same as the curve of our mirror glass. And then, since pitch is a yielding substance, the polishing agent, the cerium oxide, will become embedded in the pitch and plane the surface of the glass as we polish. You see this lighter colored stuff down these grooves, that's the cerium oxide, the polishing agent. And when the mirror is all polished like that, then what we have to do is to correct the curve. If the mirror is a little bit too flat in the middle, we have to polish it a little bit more like that. And when the maximum defect on the curve is less than 1/1000th of the thickness of a saran wrap, we're ready to have it aluminized like this and put a decal on the middle to line up our optics, help us line up our optics. The next major task is to build the body of the telescope in which the mirror will be mounted, and then to put it in a rocker so that it can be aimed anywhere above the horizon. We want to be able to push it wherever we want it to aim and have it stay wherever we leave it. Now, where do we get the materials to make a telescope like this? One thing you can do is to try the ads in the magazines like Sky and Telescope magazine, or Astronomy magazine. And if you can't find suitable ads in there to find what you need to get, you can try your local astronomy club. There's almost surely somebody in the local astronomy club who can tell you where to get what you need. Now we're about to make a 16-incher, and I have an old porthole glass which is 1 inch thick at the edge and 16.5 inches across. Portholes are hard to get, but any thick round glass can be used. So we're going to drive some furring nails into the bench here so that the mirror can, so the tool glass can turn around like this but won't slide. You can drive them in with the glass all right. This is not very tender glass. Before we actually start to grind, we want to pick up the back end of the bench so that the mud from the grinding won't run into our laps. If it runs into your lap, Mommy won't like that. So then we have to put some water on here, and then I think I'll grind the other side. And then we usually squeeze the water out, but in this case we don't need to do that. And then we have to sprinkle it with carborundum, 60 grit carborundum, like about 4 times salted scrambled eggs. Now this makes quite a bit of noise, but right now it won't make very much because of all that pitch on there. But the pitch will grind off very quickly. When we grind like this, and there's rough grinding to generate a curve, we have the mirror off to the side, the center of the mirror off to the side of the tool glass, so that the middle of the mirror glass grinds away the edges of the tool glass, and that generates a convex curve on the tool and a concave curve on the mirror. Now in this case, we're starting with an already used tool. If we had started with a flat tool, we'd have grinding pits all over the surface of this one. But since we've started with a curved tool already, at the beginning we don't have good contact. So for the very beginning it looks a little slow, but by and by it won't look so slow, and we don't have to grind anything off the edge because we've started with a curve, and we just watch this curve come out to the edge. But for generating a curve, we keep the mirror on the top and keep it turning around all the time, and keep the middle of the top one against the edges of the bottom one, towards the edges of the bottom one. We don't hang it too far over. Carborundum grinds fastest under pressure. So since this is a solid piece of glass, it behaves as if all the pressure is at the middle, and I put my hands down in such a way that the pressure of my hands is on the line across the middle. I don't put my hands out here or back here or over here or over here. I want the pressure to behave as if it's at the middle, so that the middle grinds away faster. The middle of the top glass grinds away faster against the edges of the bottom one. Well, that's quiet enough. We should clean it up. There's not much use going on because the pits that the grits make are too small. And so we clean it up and do it again. What we're trying to do is to grind a concave curve in the top one, a little deeper than the thickness of a nickel probably. Now when you sprinkle the carborundum, you see, you make longer strokes when you go across the middle, and shorter when you get to the ends. Now you notice that I have my sleeves rolled up. If you have your sleeves all the way down, you see you may get grits in them, and then when you go to do fine grinding, you got the grits carried over into your fine grinding. Up in Sacramento, there was a little boy who used to wipe his hands on his pants. He used to run his hands through his hair, and he used to wipe his hands under his armpits. And he was sparkly all over. And I made him go and change his clothes and take a shower between each 2 kinds of grits. So you have to be careful about things like that. You have to be careful how you put the mirror on and take it off. You can put it on like this if you want. I don't care if it breaks the edge of the tool. But you must not put it on like this so that the edge of the mirror gets scraped. We don't want any glass off the edge of the mirror. So you can put it on like this and take it off like this, but be careful that you don't touch the edge of the mirror to the tool. So off we go again. Ouch. Now you see the mirror turns around a lot. The mirror keeps turning around, But the tool doesn't have to turn very often because diseases of the tool are not contagious to the mirror. Because the mirror is turning all the time on the tool, even if the tool has a big chip out of it, don't make no, never mind. From the time we put carborundum on to grind till the time we put carborundum on a second time to grind is called one wet, and we've done 2 wets so far, and you can see that this much of the curve has already been ground out. As we continue, the size of the curve that's been ground out will spread out farther and farther out towards the edge. If we had started with a flat tool, we'd have had these rough pits all over the surface and we couldn't have seen this so nicely, but we started with a curved tool, and so you can watch the curve gradually go out to the edge. Now what we do is to check to see that the curve gets to the edge just when it gets to the proper depth. If it gets to the proper depth too soon, before the curve gets out to the edge, we'll put the mirror on the bottom and the tool on the top. But if it gets to the edge before it gets deep enough, then we'll hang over farther to the sides. Now this is called rough grinding, and it's a caveman's job. You eat well, sleep well, and work like hell. Now, how many hours have we been grinding all together?
All together with the rough grinding?
Yeah, rough grinding is all we've done.
About 9.5 hours.
9.5 hours. So at this point we've been grinding for over 9 hours. We've measured the focal length once, and it's between 5 and 6 feet, which is a good deal shorter than the 8 feet we're aiming for. Now when we first ground, we ground with the tool on the bottom and hang it with the mirror hanging over. Put that down, I'll show. Let's end up, please. We ground this way with the mirror hanging over the edge like that, so that the middle of the mirror grinds out against the edges of the tool. And then when we did that till we got the focal length down to 5 or 6 feet, but that's way too short. So then we turned it over. If you just pick that up. So then we turned it over and put the mirror on its back, and so with the tool on the top, you see, we can grind over here and get we had the curve in here, and all this was flat glass. In order to grind the shoulder, we put this on its face up and put the tool over here. So the middle of the tool grinds the shoulder away like that and like this. So that we've done for 2 hours or so now. And the curve's out to 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Now we have to test the focal length. If you'll just toss this thing on the floor, I'll put some, on the lawn I should say, I'll put some water on it and we'll test the focal length.
Okay. Still a little nervous about tossing it.
To measure the focal length of the mirror, we want to catch a reflection from this curve. But since the glass is all rough, we pour water over it and catch the reflection from the water curve. Oh, we're way out, aren't we? We're way too far. Can you measure that? That's 9 feet, huh?
About 9.5 feet.
9.5 feet.
Dear. What does that mean at 9.5 feet?
It means we got to turn it other side up again.
Turn it up.
We got to turn it, put the tool down again. Yeah. We've got the focal length too long now. By pushing the curve out to the edge, we got the focal length too long. Now we're shortened again by putting the tool on the bottom.
Okay.
With the mirror on top, you see, it's easy to keep it turning all the time. That's real easy. When the mirror was on the bottom and the tool was on the top, it's easy to turn the tool, but you have to remember that the mirror is on the bottom. So we had to keep turning and turning and turning the mirror all the time. That's to say, when the mirror's on the bottom, you still have to turn it. When the tool's on the bottom, you only have to turn it once in a while. The tool doesn't matter much. As I so often say, diseases of the tool are not contagious to the mirror for the simple reason that they're turning with respect to each other all the time. You got to set it down on the floor and see if you can find this. All right, just hold it there. All right, it's about there. Now if you can give me the end of the tape, or give her the other end, whichever.
Good. It's about 8 feet, 3 inches.
All right.
8 feet 3 inches.
All right, now what I suspect is that we have more than one curve on this mirror. Just hold it up so I can see the reflection of the sky. No, just hold it up, please. Hold it up level, please, so I can see the reflection of the sky. Hold it way up here, please. Yes, I think the curve isn't all the way out to the new curve. See, we had this old curve out to here. Now we got a new curve inside of it, but it's not all the way out to here. You follow me? When we did the original grinding with the tool on the bottom, we ground a curve, a steep curve in the middle, okay? But it didn't come out to the edge. You remember it took hours and hours to push the curve out towards the edge.
Right.
And we only got it somewhere out here or something, 2 inches from the edge. Then we turned it over with the mirror on the bottom.
Right.
And then with the mirror on the bottom, we pushed the curve way out near the edge. You see? All we have to take out is the shoulders. So I don't think we have very much more to do. I think half an hour will probably do us. Hang on. That's about there. What did you get, 8 feet?
Oh, it's just 1 inch shy of 8 feet. Or just
Oh, shy of 8 feet? Okay,
Shy
good.
of 8 feet.
Good.
Well, what does that mean now?
We keep doing what we've been doing. This feels good, and the curve seems to be, well, it's about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And since we just tested our focal length and it's about 8 feet, I think we should clean it all up and go on with 80 grit. 80 grit is still fairly rough grit. You can take that bucket away, I'll throw these things down and hose the place down.
Okay, so it's got to be real clean now.
Yes, and we move to another part of the lawn.
Okay.
This is all 60 grit part of the lawn, we'll move to another part for 80 grit.
Okay.
We have to be careful in the cleanup between these sets of grits so that we don't carry over any of the rough grits into the finer grinds. Otherwise we'll have rough pits all the way through. Outside first, all the outside first. Around the neck, see we got all these grooves. Get it all down. All out first. All right, now you squirt it up into the bucket. This is a brand new towel. I mean, it's a brand new cloth that we're going to use for a towel. We can't use the 60 grit one anymore. Now it's very easy to carry grits over to a finer session, and you have to be very careful about it. Have to keep your sleeves rolled up when you're grinding. See, I wouldn't grind with these sleeves down here because they'll carry the grits over. I'll take the jacket off before I start to grind again. Now, look at this, you see. You can see that there's a slightly different curve. You see that big bubble in there? You see that big bubble? That means we've got 2 curves in our glass still. But I think we can get it out all right with 80 because it's not very bad. But you see the center of the mirror, about that much, has a slightly different curve from the rest of it. If it were very different, then this thing wouldn't stick all over like it does. Anyway, let's start grinding 80 grit. This won't make quite so much noise as the 60 grit made, but it's still fairly rough grit. And it'll still behave very much like that. Yes, I got to take off my jacket. There, that's our focal length.
Just right at 8 feet.
8 feet? Fine.
8 feet.
Right there.
Neato.
Okay.
Now let me put a little bit more water on it, and if you'll take this paper, I'll see if I can see anything amiss in the curve. Yeah, hold it.
Yeah.
I think it looks good. I think it looks good. I think it looks good. And how close to the edge are we? We're to a 1/16 of an inch. We're out to the edge there. We're not more than a 1/16 anywhere. And 100 grit will get us out there. That's fine. So we've roughed out our mirror curve with 60 and 80 grit carborundum. Now we've gone on and fine ground it with 100, 240, and 400 grits. Some of the kits that you buy for making mirrors may have many kinds of grits, or many grades of grits, like 12 or 14 grades. That introduces the difficulty that you have to clean up between that many more grades, and that takes extra time. So we use about 8 wets with each grit, and we use a smaller number of grits. You might want to see what these grits look like, so I'll pour some out. This is 400, and we'll pour it out here so you can see it. And then this is 80 grit. It's a very much coarser particle, much larger sized particles. After each grit, we clean up the mirror. After each grade of grit, we clean up the mirror and dry it, and then hold it up to a bright light like this to check and see if there are any larger pits over the field of finer pits which we've just put in. Say after 240, we look to see if there are any 100 grit pits still showing. If there are, then we go on with 240 before we go on. Now we've finished with 400. We're ready to check for pits and see if we're ready to go on for 1000, which will be our last grit. You want the single bright light behind you, behind the glass, and your eye close to the front of the glass, and you look for sparkles that are bigger than the background sparkles. But in 400, there shouldn't be any background sparkles big enough for you to see. Through the last grits of fine grinding, 400 on, we have used warm water between the glasses to bend the faces of the glasses away from each other so the mirror won't grind away too much at the edge. Now when you first put this on, it'll be on those little hills, you see, and it won't slither around. But as soon as I squash down the hills, see, as soon as the hills all get squashed down, then I'm on a water layer, see? The water layer is thicker than the grit layer, okay? The water layer is thicker than the grit layer. So you have to grind for a while like this until the water gradually leaks out at the edge. Then you get down to where the grits are touching the glass. But even for quite a while it'll do that. If you dance this tool around like this, the chances are that the curves will stay sufficiently the same, sufficiently meshed, so that we won't have a sticking problem. If it really gets stuck, you can pound them apart as I do, or you can soak them in warm water. As I said, you can put it in a bathtub of warm water and they'll separate by themselves. That's a slow way, but usually if they're going to stick, they'll warn you. Just as you go towards center, it'll tend to stick, and you'll know that it's going to stick, and then you can back off. Don't fight it. If it gets sticky as you're going towards center, don't push it on over. Back it off, and then put in fresh grits and take short, fast strokes to make the curves nearly the same. In the preparation of the telescope mirror, there are 4 stages: the rough grinding and the fine grinding we have done. We're ready now to go on to the next 2 stages, which are the polishing of the mirror and the final correction. You remember that for the polishing of the mirror, we need a pitch slap like this. The pitch slap we're going to use will be bigger than this, but we're going to show you the pouring of the pitch slap for a class of students making 8 and 10-inch telescopes. But we're ready now to heat the pitch. It has to be soft like cold honey before we pour it on the glass. 2 of these, I'm sure, would do for a 10-incher. But the problem is, what are you going to heat it in, you see? If a lot of the stuff's going to be left in your container, so you can't heat them in the cardboard. If you have to heat them in something like this, and you're going to lose a lot in the can, then you have to allow for that. But I do a whole lot of pitch slaps for a class, you see, so I don't exactly worry about that problem. But probably 2 of these will do it for an 8-incher. That's say for an 8-inch lap. Now that's all I have to do. Then we leave them on very low fires like that for a couple of hours. After it's heated for a while, you see you got some liquid on the bottom, and if you move it like this, you can get the hot liquid to come up to the surface and push this colder stuff down to the bottom, so you don't run into the problem of heating some of the stuff too much. If you heat the stuff too much, and then you run it to the difficulty, it loses its ability to yield under pressure. See, here the liquid comes right at the top when we push this other stuff down into it. Now I need somebody to get me a little bit of toilet paper from the girls' room or the boys' room. Just a few sheets, like half a dozen sheets, that's all I need. Now what you have to do is to put a little water on that. I'll show you first time how much. No, that's probably too much. And then we want that wet over the whole surface. Okay, see what's happening up there? You're going to want that wet over the whole surface, but we don't want a lot. We don't want a lot of cerium oxide. That's the right amount of cerium oxide. I have to put turpentine on the tool glass. There's water and cerium oxide on the mirror glass, so the pitch will not stick. We'll have turpentine on the tool glass, so it will stick. And unfortunately, that gets turpentine on my fingers too, which is a pain. All right, now we're going to pour, okay? Don't chew it, okay? Oh, I need water, water, water. See, it's staying hot and it's just keeping on flowing. Stick. The stick for grooving the pitch lap needs to be wettable, like unfinished wood, so that it can be soaking wet so it won't stick to the pitch. Stick. This should be reheated. You see how thick this lap is? The pitch is real thick. And so it doesn't cool off fast, you see? Now, if I pour a pitch lap with pitch that's pretty cool, then it comes out real thick, and your pitch lap is real thick. If I pour it with pitch that's too hot, the pitch lap will be very thin. Now you might think that the hot pitch will stay hot longer, but it won't. The hot pitch will be so thin, it'll cool right off into the glass, and then it gets it very hard to groove. So it's much better if the pitch is not too hot. Okay, take it away. Don't use your thumbs on it. Just let gravity do its thing. Go ahead, put it here. Where's your tool? Everything's clean? You can do it again. Now this is a little bit warmer this time, so we won't have quite so much trouble. Okay. See if you can scrape this all off of here. See if you can scrape it all off of there. I don't care whether you use knives, forks, anything. When I poured this pitch lap, I didn't see what the problem was, but watching the film, I easily see what the problem was. The pitch was too hot. And if the pitch is too hot, one layer cools off on the face of the mirror and one layer cools off on the face of the tool, and the pitch in between those two layers is still warm, and it splits there when you pull the tool off the glass. Still took off the top side. It's okay, we can manage this. No, we can't. Can you take it off again, please? No, it still took off the top surface. For polishing the mirror, we need some substance like pitch that has the ability to embed the polishing agent and yet will yield under slow pressure to conform to the curve of the mirror. And we groove the pitch lap like this, waffle it if you like, so that over the entire curve it can keep the curve of the mirror. It can yield under pressure. Okay, take it away. Whose is it? Thank you. Don't push it, though. Just let it rest like that. Is that the end? All right. Your mirrors in the present state are what we call wet pressed, okay? Now let's just suppose you were able to go right ahead and polish. Then you go right ahead and polish. If you have to go out and buy beer or pet food, since they're the most bought things at the grocery store, beer and pet food, leave it wet pressed. But if you have to sleep overnight, or go for a ski trip over the weekend or something like that, don't leave them wet pressed. They'll dry together and you won't get them apart. So don't leave them wet pressed over long periods. So right now you've got cerium oxide and water between your mirror face and your pitch lap surface. So they won't stick. But if you have to go for a long time, you take them apart, leave the pitch lap by itself, immediately dry up your mirror with a clean, soft, expendable rag. Then when the pitch lap is dry all the way down into the streets, then squeegee the dust off your mirror face and set it down very carefully, center over center, but don't slide it. Just set it down center over center. And that's called dry pressed. We have a general rule. The mirror and the pitch lap are married till the illuminizer doth them part. Okay? Now don't handle the mirror faces with your fingers or your thumbs. Don't do that. Keep your hands off except when you're squeegeeing them or something like that. Don't handle the glass like that. Fingerprints, the glass is soluble in fingerprints. You might not think so, but it is. The glass is soluble in fingerprints. You don't want finger grease on your mirror face. Not only that, but if there's grease on it when it goes to the illuminizer, we don't guarantee to clearing it off. All right, now let me tell you people again what I told you early on, that in this class there is no boo-boo that can be followed by a life of sorrow. There is nothing that we can do in this class that's wrong that we can't get out of. If you drop your mirror and break it, you were supposed to do it the first day. If you've waited till now, you're just a fool, okay? But even that you can get out of. There's another piece of glass somewhere in this world with your name on it, okay? So even if you drop your mirror and break it, and that's boo-boo number one, we can get out of it. So there's nothing that you can do going the wrong way in this class that will be followed by a life of sorrow. In polishing, the cerium oxide gets embedded in the pitch. And planes the surface of the glass like this. Grinding, we rolled over the grits. Now we're going to plane the surface of the glass, and it pushes a lot harder. But the harder it pushes, the better it goes, the faster it goes. But if it pushes too hard so you can't push it, then it doesn't go very fast. So you can push down on it to make it go hard if you have to. But there are no more wets. In grinding, we kept taking it off and putting on more grits. Now we don't have to do that. The cerium oxide that does the polishing is the cerium oxide embedded in the pitch and in contact with the glass. If you put on too much cerium oxide in water, it serves as a lubricant. So don't do that. You want just a small amount of cerium oxide embedded in the pitch and enough water to keep it wet. Now in polishing, you must not let the pitch lap hang over like that. In grinding, it don't make no, never mind, because if it hangs over, nothing gets dented. But if I leave this hanging over like that, the edge of the mirror will put a dent in the pitch lap. Then if the squares beyond that will be too high, and when they come over the mirror, they'll groove it. So you have to be careful about things like that. And you have to be careful when you put warm water on the middle of this to put, suppose we wanted you're getting a little dry. You don't pour the warm water like that. You put a little cerium oxide like this, and then you put a little warm water on your fingers like this and smear it around real quick so as not to have a puddle of warm water in the middle. A puddle of warm water in the middle will raise the temperature of the glass there and raise the surface. Then when you polish, you'll polish that part too much and you'll make a little lake there in the glass. This is the hard job. You mustn't let it do its turning on its own hooks. You've got to see to it that you have the same amount of polishing for the same amount of turning. It was the same as in fine grinding. We had to do the same amount of grinding for the same amount of turning. And here we have to do the same amount of polishing for the same amount of turning. Now with only a little bit of polishing on here, we can test the focal length. And once we know the focal length from the polished curve, not from the water curve that we measured before, once we know the focal length from the curve of the glass itself, with a slight polish on it, we can go on building the telescope, because then we'll know how long a tube to get and so forth. So we'll know the dimensions of our telescope as soon as we measure the focal length of the slightly polished glass. There are two convenient ways of measuring the focal length of our mirror. One is with the sun, as you saw before. We have the sunlight coming in like this, and it hits the face of the mirror and focuses in here like this to an image of the sun. Now, in the absence of the sun, we can do this in another way. Just consider that the mirror is part of a very large sphere, you see, like a Christmas ornament, all shiny inside, and this is the center of that sphere. The light from, say, a candle here, going to any part of the sphere, would come back to the candle. Now that gives us another way of measuring our focal length, sort of indirectly. What we do is to take a flashlight in here, shooting at the mirror, and catch the image of that flashlight a little bit off sides like this, and go back and forth like this until the image of the flashlight on the paper is sharp. That means we're at the center of curvature of our large sphere, which is approximately twice the focal length of our mirror. So since the focal length of our mirror is about 8 feet, we'll start our measurement out at about twice that. Okay, so we'll just guess at 16 feet here. 6, 9, 12. Somewhere around here will be 16 feet. And we'll see if the flashlight gets into our eyes back here. And now you see the center of it focuses about here, so we'll catch the reflection on here, see if we can find it. See, it focuses way back here, and so we'll bring this back, and then the focus will come up. We'll bring this back a little more, focus will come up again. Now we're off by just about an inch, maybe. Bring this back an inch, and this forward an inch, a little more. There, now you see the bulb there, the focus of the bulb and the actual bulb are the same distance from the mirror. So we'll measure the distance between this image of the bulb and the bulb itself. We'll measure the distance from there to the mirror. 3 feet. 6 feet. I had 15, so it's 16 feet 2 inches. 16 feet 2 inches, so the focal length will be half that. That's 8 foot 1 inch. We were shooting for 8 feet, and we got 8 foot 1 inch. That's very good. The advantage of having it kind of in between like that is that you get enough power without having it too hard to manage. If the focal length is too long, the telescope is too hard to manage. If the focal length is too short, it's too hard to get high enough power. So we're right where we want it to be. Well, now that we've measured the focal length and we know that the focal length is 8 foot 1 inch, we can order the tube, build the whole telescope so that we can read the curve. Our problem now is to build the whole telescope so we can read the curve and to polish the mirror more. It's just a little bit polished and it's hazy at the edge. Now, lots of mirrors don't polish at the edge. Ours polished fairly well at the edge because we used warm water earlier on, and just for that purpose, to get it to polish at the edge, and it does polish some at the edge. But some mirrors don't polish at the edge, and lots of mirrors that end up with turned down edges, that is to say the curve is too low at the edge, lots of mirrors that wind up like that aren't polished well at the edge. And the problem was really introduced in fine grinding. If you use the warm water and you're very careful taking the thing off that you don't run it over the edge, then very often the mirrors will polish at the edge. It matters, of course, whether the mirror polishes at the edge. If you consider how much light you add when you put 1 inch around the edge, it's quite a piece of light that you're adding to your mirror. If you put 1 inch in the middle, it doesn't matter very much, but 1 inch added to the edge is a great deal of glass. After we've been checking the focal length or anything, before we start polishing again, we always squeegee the dust off the mirror face like this. You can't assume that because you've been drying it with a cloth, it doesn't have any lint on it. But your hands can feel all sorts of fine stuff. So you squeegee it with a dry hand before you put on cerium oxide and water to polish again. We'll have something like 4 more hours to polish maybe. We might get it done in less than 4 hours if we're lucky. Depends on how hard it pushes and how much we eat. If you're very vigorous in polishing, polish very hard, it polishes pretty fast. Now you're very careful putting it down like this so that you don't bang the pitch against the glass. Now if by accident you bang the pitch against the glass and broke a little piece off, and I did break a little piece off the edge here, you have to be sure that it does not get between your pitch lap and your mirror. Because if a little bit of pitch gets between your pitch lap and your mirror, it will be embedded in one of the squares of your pitch lap. And that raises that square a little bit, and every time that square crosses your mirror, you get a new groove. So you have to be very careful that nothing gets stuck in the pitch lap. Okay. It only takes about 1/4 teaspoon of cerium oxide probably to polish a 24-incher. Though we usually use more. This is the job that I wish were easier. Now, if the commercial people, they don't polish these things by hand. They have a machine do all this. It's getting a little dry. Now, when it gets dry, you just take it off. Put a tiny bit of cerium oxide in the middle. And a little bit of water. And smear the water around real fast so as not to introduce the temperature problem all in one place. Keep the water warm. And then put it down very carefully.
Okay. Here's our catalog. 18-inch tube, one piece at
7.5 feet. Since polishing a mirror like this usually takes several hours, if you don't want to do it all in one stretch, you can take time out and go and buy the tube. Usually the tubes are available at your local concrete accessories outlet, or you can consult your local contractor. Now, do you have any use for this little piece you cut off?
No, you can take it. I'll give it to you.
Thank you.
7.5 feet, right?
Yeah, 7.5 feet. Now that we know our focal length and now that we've bought the tube, we're ready to build the rest of the telescope, and it's going to look something like this. This is my old 18-incher called the little one, and on these larger ones, that's from 16 inches up, we have a box that goes all the way down to the end, and then we have a tailgate like that, and we'll show you the inside in a little while. But smaller telescopes like 12 inches and down, we don't run the box all the way to the back end. We just put a tailgate in the back end of the cardboard tube. Once we have the mirror all done and mounted in this box around the tube and all, whether it's this side or this side, we have to be able to aim the telescope above the horizon, anywhere above the horizon, so we have to swing the telescope in a rocker. So this is the rocker. These boards are called the side boards. This is called the front board. This is called the bottom board. And then this one that sits on the ground is called the ground board. This one sits on 3 feet. It's a tripod. And then this thing swivels around on top of the ground board. And then this goes up and down like this in the cradle boards. These are called cradle boards. Inside the side boards are the cradle boards that cradle the telescope like that. We'll make the box around the tube out of 3/4 inch plywood so that when we nail into the edges of it, the plywood won't split so easily. And we'll have it 3 feet long so that it's about 1/3 of the focal length of our mirror. And the inside width of the box has to be a little bit more than the outside diameter of our cardboard tube, so that we can put some Teflon down the sides of the box so the tube will slide in and out easily. All right. Now it can set up. We've cut the 6 boards for the rocker. We're now going to build the rocker. Put one up on the work table. Now this is our top side. Yeah, this is our top side. So this is 20 and a half, and we've got to add cradle boards. That gets us up to 22. We're going to allow a 1/2 inch for clearance, so there's 22 and a half inches. This 22 and a half inches is the inside width of the rocker box. We've allowed for the width of the box around the tube, the outside width of the box around the tube, and the thickness of the cradle boards on either side, and we've allowed for a little clearance. All right, now we lay this down like this. For our smaller telescopes, we make the rockers out of 3/4 inch plywood, but for bigger telescopes like this with a longer focal length, we make the rockers out of heavier stuff. This will be 1 1/8 inch flooring plywood, and to prevent flexure in the ground board, we'll double it. Right side up. I'd like to see what it looks like with the box inside it. We want to see how much clearance we're going to have, so we're going to put the cradle boards in here and jam the box up against them and see how much clearance we got on the other side. Should be about 1/2 inch. This is going to be a tripod, you see. This is what we call the ground board. It's going to be other side up. So it takes 3 feet, one at each of these front corners. This is front, and one in the middle of the back side. So it sits on 3 feet. So it's a tripod. It's only this tall, but it's a tripod all the same. Now, the lower bearing is going to be this computer disk moving on 3 pads of Teflon. The 3 pads of Teflon will be fastened to the ground board, and this will be fastened on here. And the Teflon pads are going to be something like this, but they'll be on the ground board. So this thing is going to spin around on these 3 pieces of Teflon fastened to the ground board. So first we have to fasten this thing with some little tacks so that it won't fall down when we turn it over on that. We want this thing fastened, this computer disk fastened to this, and the Teflon facing up so that our bearing surface doesn't get dirty. See, this is going to be upside down. So this surface is going to face downward and it won't get dirty. If we put our bearing the other side up, with this up, then dirt would get on here and get into our bearing. But the Teflon goes on the ground board, and the surface that runs on the Teflon goes on the bottom of the box. This is the bottom of the box. For smaller telescopes, like 8 inchers, we use phonograph records. But for these larger ones, if we can get computer discs, we prefer these computer discs. These are very hard, slick surfaces, and they're 14 inches in diameter. So they make very good bearing surfaces. For finding out where we want the Teflon on here, we're going to use this for a circle. We're not centering this circle on the center of the board. We're centering it over the triangle which is made by the 3 feet
We want Teflon
underneath
out in
the
that
board.
direction, out in that direction, and out in this direction. This is 1 foot over here and 2 feet over there. So that disc is 14 inches. So we can put these Teflon pieces out here on the outside edge of this thing in something like an equilateral triangle. Let's just get it looking pretty much like an equilateral triangle. And then 2 little tacks on each one will fix it. And the heads have to be driven down into the Teflon.
Ready?
Wait, no.
Gotta turn this around this way. This goes this way. The front is that side. Yeah, it's going to be something like there. Now hang on, let me see if I can get this screw through both holes. Yeah, all right. We're in both holes. Okay, then the screw. Do you have a washer on it? So. Still not quite snug. Yeah. Now you're too tight. There, good. Now feel it.
Wow, that's beautiful. That is really smooth.
You might think that a big, thick piece of glass like this wouldn't bend, and that's why they made it big, thick like this, so that it wouldn't bend. But we're only allowed to bend about 1/1000th of the thickness of a saran wrap. And for that reason, we still have to be careful, and that's why these things are supported with 3 points on the back for the smaller ones, 9 points on the bigger ones. What we have on the back of these tailgates is 3 adjustment balls for positioning the adjusting the position of the mirror so that it looks straight out the front end of the tube. Now, on the inside of the tailgate, we have these pieces of masonite on this floppy piece of cardboard, so that in case the telescope is dropped on the floor, the bolts won't break the glass. Now, on the bigger telescopes, where the mirror is quite a bit larger and maybe not so thick as these, we have to have a 9-point suspension on the tailgate. So each of these adjustment bolts pushes into a triangle which has 3 pressure points that push into the mirror. You have 3 triangles, one here, and one here, so that each of these 3 tailgate bolts pushes into 3 points on the mirror, so you have 9 points of pressure on the mirror to spread the support system out so as to keep the big mirrors from bending. As I said, they're allowed to bend about 1/1000th of the thickness of a saran wrap over their entire width. So now what we have to do is to find the center of this board, because the mirror, the support mechanism, has to be centered on the tailgate. So first we'll just find out where the intersection of these 2 diagonals is, and then we'll construct, Then we'll construct the, hang on. I can't see that side. All right, good. Then we'll construct the tailgate. Which is 8?
This is 8.
This is 8. All right. Now, let me get that that envelope with that tailgate picture in it. Now, this picture I drew to half scale. That is to say, 8 inches on this picture will be 16 inches on the diagram. So we just have to measure them on here and find out what we want. So what we want now is the distance out to the bolts. So that's going to be 5 inches. This is 2.5 inches on the picture. So 5 inches. So that's where our bolts go on that circle. Now, we want them tight fit so that at the star party, people won't come up behind and wind them up with their fingers. We don't want them loose enough so that they can be wound up with their fingers. The cardboard has to be thin enough so that it won't change the pressure on these, on the points on the triangles. It's just to keep the triangles from turning around this way and getting their points out of position. But it's not to keep the triangles from doing this freely. That gets glued down here to the middle, you see. And then we put our glue our triangles, our wooden triangles over here. Whoo-wee! All right, now what we usually do is to cut these corners back a little bit. But probably we don't need to bother with that because our mirror is going to be way out beyond that. So these are going to go on like that, you see.
This is better for tests.
This is plenty good. Back. Now you see, we don't have to get these things exactly positioned because what we're going to position is the points on here, see? There we go. Now we're ready for the bib.
How about the blocks for the strap?
We have to put the blocks in also for the straps. Okay. All right, I think that should do us. Now we can cut the bib. Between the blocks is almost 16 3/4 inches. We only need to have the mirror slip in here between them, and this will center the mirror back and forth this way over the tailgate. That's where we want it centered. And it will slip in between here, and then we put something over the top to keep the mirror from rolling down forward through the tube. All right, we're now going to put the tailgate together. We got to have it hinged to this tube box, and we've already built the support system here. But we have to mount the mirror in here. We're going to put straps on here. We have to mount the mirror in here in such a way that it sits right over the middle of the support system. So we have to transfer the middle of the support system to the front of our bib. So we're finding that the diagonals. This is how we found the center of the support system by drawing the line between the intersection of the diagonals. So we're doing the same thing here. So this is the center of our support system, and the center of the mirror has to be over that. When the strap is around here, you see, we're going to have this strap fastened here on these blocks so that when we slide the mirror down in there and the edges of the mirror run into that belt, the center of the mirror should be over the center of the support system. All right, so now we're going to put the hinges on. We've already put the hinges on the edge of the tailgate. And we've taped this so the bib won't fall off while we're working on these things this side up. And so now we have to fasten have to screw the hinges to the box itself. You remind me of my friend in Sacramento. By the time he finished building something, it was the weight was about half nails and half wood. Now I think the thing to do is to put this thing up on these things so that we can open the back end, put the mirror in, put the strap on. Yeah. So we're going to put a hasp on here, you see, so that when the mirror is in there, we keep this thing turned like that so the mirror can't come out. That's when we don't have the screws in, we still have to have a safety thing up here. So we put this thing right over the center. So we can fasten one end of the strap in here first, you see, before we get the mirror, and then pull it up to the right place and fasten the other end over here. Then we'll cut the extra off.
Had we left room for it, it would be better to have the strap come around the outside edges of the block. Otherwise, there is the danger that the strap itself may bend the mirror.
Fortunately, you see, with all these scratches on the back from going round and round on the bench, we can see where the middle is without having to mark it. That's pretty funny. Now, if the screws didn't have such real wide washery heads, we'd have to put a washer in there to hold it so we don't hang on the screw. You see, the weight of the strap can't hang on the screw. It has to hang on the friction between the screw head and the wood. It has to push the belt down like this. It's the friction that keeps it from coming off like this. There we go. Now what we don't have yet is anything to keep the mirror from falling forward. So that we have to do now. There has to be something that protrudes across this thing, like a piece of masonite or something, that keeps the mirror from falling forward. Now you see, if these things are in this position so that we could get the mirror in easy, then this thing runs into the tailgate and it won't shut. So in that position, you can close the tailgate, but the mirror can't roll out. These blocks are to keep the tube from running all the way through. I'll show you. We'll just push this piece of tube through there, you see. We have to have something to keep it from going too far down. We're putting these Teflon strips in here so that when we slide the tube down into the box, it slides down on these 4 strips of Teflon, so the friction is easy. We want it so that it slides in and out easily but stays tight. Okay, we got our 4 Teflon strips so the tube will slide in here. Now we got to peel the inside of the tube out. Now, you see, you get a hold of this little tip here, you see, and then you just peel. And that's a plastic layer. And sometimes it'll peel all the way out from one end like this, but not always. And if it breaks, you may have to send a kid in to fix it. If there's a little tear in it, you see, it tears right across. This is a fun.
Far enough that we can reach from the other end.
Oh, easy. Easy. Well, what we're going to do now is to cut some slices out of these so that they'll fit inside the big tube. We want one piece where the big tube comes in near the tailgate, where it's going to be pushing up against the lid, against the roof of this box. We don't want the tube to buckle there, so we're going to have it reinforced with that. And the other reinforcement is where it hangs out over the edge here. So we want 2 pieces of reinforcing inside that tube to make a double wall at the back end where it comes in here, and at the front end where it comes out here. So the problem now is, how much do we cut out of this? So this wall, let me have the yo-yo or a ruler. The wall is about 1/4 of an inch thick, yeah, almost exactly 1/4 of an inch thick, maybe a tiny bit more than 1/4 of an inch thick. And so when we put this one inside of that, we're going to decrease the diameter by 1/2 inch. So if you decrease the diameter by 1/2 inch, you decrease the circumference by pi times 1/2 inch. So it's going to be a tiny bit more than 1.5 inches that we have to cut out of this. Okay, let's try it. Let's see, is this the, yeah, this is the end we cut out, okay. Is it in? Mm-hmm. Oh, how easy. has to go a little farther in. All right, that's far enough in. All right, in you go. Hang on. Till it bumps, till it bumps, till it bumps. I think you bumped. For a focusing device, we're going to be sliding this brass tubing in and out of this cardboard thing, and this is going to be glued down to here, you see, and we're going to stick this from inside the tube out like that and glue it in inside, or screw it in inside. And so this will be, our eyepiece will be in here, and then we'll focus by sliding that in and out of there. But since that's a little bit tight, I'm going to peel out a layer of paper from inside there. If they're too tight, we peel a little out. If they're too loose, we glue a little piece in. There, that's just right, okay? So now this gets glued down onto here and has to set up. Now you might think that just putting the glue on there would be sufficient, but it's usually not sufficient. We usually scrape it in so that the cardboard gets wet with the glue before we put it down there. Because if you don't get the cardboard wet with the glue, your glue joint may not hold. All right, that just has to set up. Our problem now is to mount the diagonal mirror in the middle of the telescope tube so that the light can be reflected from the diagonal into the eyepiece. So we're going to have this block in here like this with the diagonal mirror on here. So the light's going to come from the main mirror, reflect from there into the eyepiece tube over here at the side. So the problem is how to hold this thing out in the middle of the tube. That we're going to do by having 3 shingles sticking out of it like this, and we'll cut them off where they intersect the walls of the tube. We're not going to glue this thing in here because the way these things go to pieces is to have somebody with ice cream on his hands or her hands reach in here and pull this thing out. And then the shingles get broken. Now, if you've had them glued in there and they've been broken off, you're in big trouble at the Star Party site. But if they're just pressed in here and glued against the wall, it's a simple matter to take a nail or something, get the little piece of shingle out and put another shingle in. Anyway, so this will just fit in here like this. And we'll pound it in tight. You just go in there till it's tight. And then cut it off with the tin snips. Slightly concave. You just twist the tin snips as you cut. Can you see that this is slightly concave? So that when we push it into this block, it'll butt at the 2 ends and won't rock over like that. If we cut it the other way, you see, then it would not be rigidly positioned. So then we jam this one in here. Our tube is 18 inches inside diameter. We've got to cut these shingles so that it just fit inside. So we've got to measure 9 inches out here, 9 inches out there, 9 inches out there, and cut these shingles off and then bevel the corners. So we'll mark a little place where approximately where these 3 lines intersect. And then measure out there 9 inches. So we just put a little mark on the top of the shingle there. All right. Now we cut those things off at that point. All right. Now we're going to cut these corners off so that when we slide the thing back and forth in the tube for adjusting the position of the diagonal, it won't split these shingles. So we're just going to cut these corners off like this. What we're going to do now is to glue 3 little pieces of leather down on here, and then glue the mirror down on the 3 pieces of leather, and then we'll prop it up against the wall like this while the glue sets up. Leather is lintless. That is to say, if you use cardboard, it might peel off in layers. That's one of the things that it might do, and drop your diagonal mirror down. Leather doesn't make a lot of lint, so I like to use leather. So first we'll put some glue down on 3 places. And then we'll put the leather down. We want to get the leather wet, though. So we'll smear it around a little bit like that. And put our mirror down. The problem with these is the same as the problem with the objective mirror. It's got to be mounted on 3 points in the back, not more than 3. You might think that that's too thick to bend, but we're allowed to bend it only 1/1000th of the thickness of a saran wrap. That's our tolerance. So we have to keep it from bending. So we mount it on 3 little pieces of leather like this. Now this is a pretty fancy diagonal mirror. Not everybody gets a diagonal mirror that's so fancy as this. We know the focal length of the mirror. It's 8 foot 1 inch. So what we want to do is to find out where we want the eyepiece hole so that the image plane comes just a little ways outside the tube so that we can examine it with our eyepiece. This is going to be inside the tube, but the focal plane we want to come very close to this, and so this will be sticking out of the tube by 1.5 inches or so. So we're going to measure down through the tube here to where the focal length would be. And then from that position, we're going to have to come back by this distance here, which is from the middle of the tube out to where the image plane is going to be. From the middle of the tube to the edge of the tube is going to be 9 inches, but we want it to stick out about 2 inches further, so that's 11 inches. So we have to go back from our focal length measurement by 11 inches to where we put in the diagonal mirror, and that's to where we put in the eyepiece tube. We're going to put the eyepiece tube on this side, so the eyepiece tube comes out this way, so that you can grab the front end with your right hand while you're aiming it around the sky like this. Grab the front end with your right hand and push the thing around when you're scanning the moon or whatever you're scanning. That's right. All right, stop please now. Stop please now. Take it out, please. We want to do a little bit of that from inside. If that machine will do it from inside, that's fine, but we want it cut from the inside too, so that when it gets all the way through, it doesn't tear the cardboard for us. The faster you do it, the better it works, because that works as a chisel. You want to do it with a little pressure, but fast. Okay, you're through already. You can do this from the top a little bit more, if you will. Without any pressure down. Tip it towards you. Tip it towards you. Okay. Neato. Neato.
Okay.
We've put the diagonal mirror onto the spider mount. Now we push it in here till I can look down the eyepiece tube into the diagonal and see the objective straight down in front of me. That means the diagonal is in the right place. Then we use the tailgate bolts for positioning the mirror so that it looks straight at the eyepiece hole. Anyway, the diagonal's in, we can put the mirror in, and then we can find the center of gravity, and then we can hang it up and use it. Well, we want to set the telescope up now so that we can read the curve. So we're outside now, we get to find the center of gravity of this thing. So we've got it over a roller to where it balances, you see. So I'll mark a little place here on this, where the ruler is on this side, and a place on the other side where the roller sticks out on the other side, and then we'll average those two positions 24.5 inches on this side, and it's 25 inches on this side. So 24.75 inches is the center of gravity. 24.75 inches from the tailgate is the center of gravity. See, 24.75 puts our top end, well, we have to be a little higher than that anyway, you see, because the distance that we have to clear is over to this corner. It's not just down to here. It's not 24.75. Will you hold that on the mark? So it's about 26.5. 26.5. So it's more nearly 26.5. So we'll be just clear of the top of this.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Exactly where we
So it came out nicely. So we can put in the side bearings. We now have to put the cradle boards in here, but they have to be far enough away from the front wall so the box won't run into the front wall. So the box, half the width of the box is going to be 10.25 inches. So we'll put the middle of this 10.5 inches from the front wall. How's that? 10.5 inches from the front wall. So he centers the center of the cradle board this way, and I center the altitude. But put your screws in first from your side. Okay, now you have to tell me how far forward and backward it has to go, and I'll do the altitude. I got my marks on.
Okay, you need to go that way.
How far?
3/4.
All right, now let's see if it'll swing, okay? Okay.
Ready?
Yep. Wait a while till I get underneath it. Okay. Is it on our Teflon? I think it's on our Teflon.
Yeah,
This thing doesn't hold up here.
right, we need the screws.
Let me see how it moves now. That's fine. That's good movement. See, we want it to push on the diagonal. When we push it on the diagonal, we want it to go on the diagonal. That
You
feels
wouldn't want it to move
fine.
any more freely than that, though.
No, this
or it
is
wouldn't
just
stay
right.
put.
And see, it goes just a little bit past horizontal. Okay? Actually, these big ones never have to go down to the horizon, so it doesn't have to do that. All right, we're ready
See if
to
it
read.
stands all the way up.
We're ready to read the mirror. We've got to screw this thing up in order to read the mirror. When we're putting the mirror in and have the tailgate open and all, we just use this hasp for closing it up. But when the telescope is in use, we're going to have it screwed in the four corners into those 4 blocks so that it's rigid. You want the thing to behave like one piece of stuff. Now that suddenly makes it possible to line up the tailgate of the mirror with the tailgate bulbs, which otherwise it was not possible to do. Now, if you have a wrench, I'll tell you how to line it up. What we want to do now is to line up the optics, you see. We want the diagonal mirror to be right down in front of this tube, which means it has to go a tiny bit forward. All right. And then we have to have it so that looking down this tube, we see the center of the mirror straight ahead. All right, what we're doing now is looking into the eyepiece tube at the reflection of the diagonal in the objective mirror. Now, in order to get the diagonal properly positioned, we want it to see the center of the objective straight down. So when we've got it approximately lined up, then we move this back bar. And if I move the back bar up, the image of the mirror moves up. If I move it down, the image of the mirror moves down. If I move it in, the mirror image moves in. And if I move it out, the image moves out. And so that's how we do our fine adjustment. It goes the way we want it to go. We'll do it in fine detail when the mirror's back from the illuminator, but just for reading it now, we're doing it kind of crudely.
So we've got the diagonal lined up. Now we have to line up the objective mirror. So you see it's too wide on this side. Can you see that? It's too wide over here. You have to tighten your bolt a little tiny bit. Tighten the top a hair. Half as much as you did that one. Okay, that's good. I'm ready to read the mirror. I'm ready to read the curve on the mirror. What we're doing now is reading the curve of the mirror. So what we do is to get the glint of sunlight on one of those insulators in focus at the eyepiece, and we'll show you that. And then we throw the eyepiece out of focus on either side, a little bit too far in and a little bit too far out, and we examine the distribution of light on those two out of focus discs. If the mirror happens to be too deep in the middle, the center light will bundle too soon, so we'll see the center of the disc too bright when we push the eyepiece in. If the center of the mirror is too flat, the center light will bundle too far out, and we'll see the center of the outside disc too bright. Any portion of the mirror that bundles too much light beyond focus is too flat. Any part that bundles too much light on the inside disc is too deep. So what we'll do, you see, we'll get one of those little bright spots in focus, and then we'll pull the eyepiece out and we'll push the eyepiece in, and we'll see what the two discs look like, and then we'll assess the damage. When we read the mirror in Ken's backyard, the mirror was a little bit too high in the middle, and we wanted to polish the middle a little bit without risking touching the rest of the mirror. And so I just happened to have an 8-inch pitch lamp, which we put in hot water very little by gradually so as not to crack the pitch, and heated it up very, very slowly until it gets hot enough so that you can dent the pitch with your fingernail very easily. And then we pressed it on here until each of the squares comes down to this curve, not to the curve that was originally poured for, but for this curve, and then we can polish the center of this mirror with this lap. Now, if you didn't happen to have a smaller lap and you wanted a smaller lap, you can always cut off the edges of your old lap. But the difficulty is then you don't have the big lap to smooth it with afterwards. But we still have the big lap if we want to smooth afterwards. But the problem is to dig out the middle with this little lap without risking wrecking the edge of the mirror. So that's why we like to do it this way. See, the 10 inches we do on 8-inch laps for the same reason. We do them on 8-inch grinding tools and on 8-inch pitch laps so that we don't have to risk wrecking the edge when we dig out the middle. Most of the curves come out with too high a middle after you've been polishing. So mostly you have to dig out the middle a little bit like this, and if you have a smaller lap, that's the easy way to do it. I polished the center of the 16-incher with the 8-inch lap till the 16-incher was warm in the middle. Then we read it in the telescope tube. It was still too high in the middle, so we went in back and polished it till it was warm again. We had to do it several times before the out-of-focus discs looked the same on both sides of focus. When they do, your mirror is ready for the illuminator. Most people, of course, don't bring their mirrors down to the illuminator like we did. They look at the magazines to find out where to send them. We have, in this case, soaked the mirror in acid and then cleaned it up with water. And now we're cleaning it with methanol before it goes into the vacuum chamber to get the aluminum coat on.
Okay, now it's on. Now it's on. Now we'll check to see if that'll rotate in there. And there it's spinning around. Now we're ready to put the vacuum on.
See, this is the fun part of making telescopes, getting the mirror illuminated. That's the fun part. You've done all your hard work. Now you get to see something. It doesn't look too hazy, does it? But it's not as bright as... Yeah. Ah. Oh, it looks better than I thought it would. Now, anyway, we need to put a decal on it. We put a decal at the measured center of the mirror to help in lining up the optics. We line up the diagonal mirror struts till the decal appears to be straight down the axis of the eyepiece tube. Only after the diagonal is lined up like this with the decal do we glue it to the sides of the tube. Mission accomplished. Now that we've done all this hard work, it's time to assemble the telescope for a star party so people can see what the rest of the universe looks like. Okay, you guys, the moon. You better salvage that. And are you going to get the mirror, the 16-incher in?
Right here.
Oh, it's in?
Oh,
you have
my
it.
gosh. My golly. That is incredible. That is just beautiful.
When we were reading the mirror, we lined up the diagonal rather crudely. Now with the decal on the aluminized mirror, we can line it up carefully. Okay, here it goes. Run this down. Now that we've lined up the diagonal so that the decal is seen straight down the axis of the eyepiece tube, we're ready to adjust the tailgate bolts till the objective is looking straight back at the eye. All right, loosen mine a hair. Stop. Okay, I think we're in business. Now let's get the moon. This has never seen anything except a power pole. The only thing this has ever seen is an insulator. Oh, this is a fabulous show. All right, everybody come and have a look.
Wow.
Now you see what we did. As Einstein said, out yonder there was this huge world, the contemplation of which beckoned like a liberation. But sometimes people ask me, what is beyond this huge world? And I ask them, what is beyond the space when you dream? The dream is in the dreamer. The dream is in the dreamer, and the dream is alive.